My name is Sarah McKenzie. I'm 36 years old, and I've been a backcountry ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 11 years. The Smokies are the most visited national park in America. Over 12 million people a year come to see our mountains, our forests, our waterfalls. Most stick to the popular trails and overlooks, but my job takes me deep into the backcountry, into the 500,000 acres of old Appalachian wilderness that most visitors never see. I thought I knew these mountains. I grew up in Gatlinburg, spent my childhood hiking these trails with my grandfather, who taught me the old ways, the folklore, the respect these mountains demand. But 6 months ago, I found a settlement in Cataloochee Valley that exists in 1823 and 2024 simultaneously, where the same families have been living for 200 years without aging, and where something in the mountains has been keeping them preserved as payment for a debt their ancestors made with forces older than the Appalachians themselves. It started in late September during a solo patrol of the remote sections of Cataloochee. Most people know Cataloochee for its elk herds and historic buildings, preserved homesteads from the 19th century that show how mountain people lived before the park was established. But there are areas of Cataloochee that aren't on any tourist map, valleys so deep and isolated that even experienced hikers rarely venture there. I was checking on a backcountry campsite about 8 miles from the nearest road, following an old trail that dated back to when this area was still inhabited farmland. The trail wound through dense forest, crossed several streams, and climbed over a ridge into a valley I'd only visited once before, years ago. As I descended into the valley, I noticed something odd. The forest looked different. Not damaged or diseased, but different in a way I couldn't immediately identify. The trees were arranged in patterns that suggested cultivation. The undergrowth was less dense, and there were cleared areas that looked like they'd been actively maintained. Then I smelled smoke, wood smoke, the kind that comes from a chimney, not a wildfire or campfire. I followed the scent over a small rise, and there in the valley below was a settlement. Not historic buildings preserved as park structures, but an active, inhabited community. I could see smoke rising from chimneys, laundry hanging on lines, chickens scratching in yards, and people, a dozen or more, going about their daily activities in clothing that looked like it was from the early 1800s. I stood there trying to process what I was seeing. This was deep in the park, miles from any legal residence, in an area where human habitation had been prohibited since the park's establishment in 1934. But this wasn't a handful of illegal squatters. This was an entire community, living openly, with permanent structures and established routines. I approached cautiously, calling out as I got closer, "Hello, park ranger coming through. I need to speak with whoever's in charge here." An older man emerged from one of the cabins, wearing homespun clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. He looked at me with an expression that wasn't surprise or fear, but something more like resignation. "You found us again," he said, his accent thick with old mountain dialect. "Been about 15 years since the last ranger came through. Figured we were due." "Sir, you can't be living here. This is national park land. There's no legal residence permitted in this area." "We've been here since 1823, he said calmly. "Long before there was a park, long before there was laws about who could live where. My name's Elijah Caldwell. My great-great-grandfather settled this valley, and we've been here ever since." "That's impossible. The park would have relocated you when it was established. There's no record of any Caldwell family in this area. We ain't in the records because we ain't exactly in your time. He gestured for me to follow him. Come on, I'll show you something. He led me to the edge of the settlement, to a spot where the ground changed abruptly. On one side was the cultivated land of the settlement. On the other was thick forest. But the boundary was too sharp, too distinct. It looked less like a transition and more like a seam, a place where two different pieces of reality had been sewn together. Here, step across that line, Elijah said, and you're back in your 2024. Step back this way, and you're in our 1823. We exist in both times at once, or maybe we exist outside of time entirely. Been this way since my great-great-grandfather made the deal. What deal? Elijah's expression darkened. There's things in these mountains older than the mountains themselves. Powers that were here before Cherokee, before any people. My ancestor, Jonathan Caldwell, he found something in a cave up on that ridge. Step back this way and you're in our 1823. We exist in both times at once, or maybe we exist outside of time entirely. Been this way since my great-great-grandfather made the deal. What deal? Elijah's expression darkened. There's things in these mountains older than the mountains themselves. Powers that were here before Cherokee, before any people. My ancestor, Jonathan Caldwell, he found something in a cave up on that ridge, something that offered him prosperity, protection, a good life for him and his descendants. All he had to do was stay in this valley, keep the settlement going, and perform certain duties. Once a generation, when the mountains ask, we have to provide something, a service. Sometimes it's tending to places humans shouldn't go. Sometimes it's guarding things that shouldn't be found. And in return, we get this. A life that doesn't change, time that doesn't move forward. A place where we're protected from disease and hardship and death. You're saying you've been alive since 1823? Not exactly. I was born in 1823, but I've only aged maybe 40 years. Time moves different here. A year in your world might be a day here or a week, or sometimes time just stops entirely. We've been maintaining this settlement for 2 centuries, but we've only lived maybe 50 years total. I looked back at the settlement. Children were playing in a yard, but now that I looked closely, they moved strangely, repeating the same games and the same patterns like they were stuck in loops. A woman was hanging laundry, but the clothes on the line never seemed to dry or blow in the wind. Everything had a quality like a painting, vivid and detailed, but not quite alive. What happens if you leave? I asked. We catch up to real time. All the years we've been avoiding hit us at once. A man who's been living in 1823 for 200 years would age 200 years in seconds. We'd turn to dust the moment we crossed that boundary. And the duties? What do you have to provide? Elijah hesitated. Right now, we're in a waiting period, but when the mountains call, we have to answer. Usually, it involves keeping people away from certain areas, or making sure certain caves stay sealed, or dealing with things that come out of the deep places. The mountains are old, Ranger, old and aware and full of things that shouldn't exist. We're the caretakers, the maintenance crew. We keep the bad things contained. Over the next several hours, Elijah showed me around the settlement. There were 23 people living there, all descendants of the original Caldwell family, all existing in this temporal bubble. They farmed, raised animals, lived simple lives that would have been normal in the 1820s, but were utterly impossible in 2024. He showed me their records, a family Bible dating back to 1823 with births and deaths recorded in fading ink. Except there were almost no deaths. Children grew to adulthood and then just stopped aging. The oldest person in the settlement was Jonathan Caldwell himself, the original settler, who looked about 70, but had been alive for over 200 years. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked. "Why not hide when you saw me coming?" "Because the time's coming again," Elijah said quietly. "We can feel it. The mountains are getting restless. There's something stirring in the deep places, something that's going to need dealing with. And when that happens, we might need help from your side of time. Might need a ranger who knows we're here, who can help keep people away from areas where we'll be working." "Working how?" "There's caves in these mountains that go down further than any map shows, places where the stone remembers things, where old powers sleep. Sometimes those powers wake up, try to push through into your world. When that happens, we have to push them back, seal them in, make sure they stay where they belong. It's dangerous work. People die doing it, even with the protection we have. But it's our job, our purpose, the reason we were allowed to stay here." He led me to a cave entrance on the ridge above the settlement. It was small, barely noticeable, hidden behind laurel thickets. "This is one of the deep places," he said. "Goes down maybe 2 miles, ends in a chamber where something very old is sleeping. We check it once a month, make sure the seals are holding. Last time we checked, there were cracks forming. The thing down there is trying to get out." I looked into the cave. Cold air flowed from it, carrying a smell like ozone and rotten flowers. And from deep within, I could hear something. Not quite a sound, but a vibration, a rhythm like breathing or a heartbeat. "What is it?" I asked. "Don't know exactly. The old stories call it different names. The Cherokee knew about it, left warnings carved in stone near the entrance, said it was a spirit that ate light and time. Whatever it is, it's been down there for thousands of years, and it needs to stay down there." Elijah handed me a map, hand-drawn, showing the settlement and the surrounding areas, with certain locations marked with symbols I didn't recognize. "These are the places you need to keep people away from," he said. "If you see hikers heading toward any of these areas, redirect them. Make up reasons. Trail closed for maintenance, bear activity, whatever. Just keep them out. And if you start hearing reports of strange sounds or lights from these areas, contact me." "How do I contact you? You don't exactly have phones." He smiled slightly. "Leave a message at the old chimney on Caldwell Road. That's the historic site near the elk viewing area. We check it weekly. Write what you need to tell us. Leave it in the chimney, and we'll find it." I left the settlement as the sun was setting, crossing back over that sharp boundary from 1823 into 2024. The transition was immediate and disorienting. One step, and the settlement vanished, replaced by thick forest with no sign that any humans had ever lived there. I turned to look back, and for just a moment I could see them, ghostly and translucent, Elijah and his family going about their evening routines in a time that wasn't quite connected to mine. I've been back 3 times since then. The settlement is only visible on certain days, when conditions are right, when the boundary between times is particularly thin. I've kept hikers away from the marked areas on Elijah's map, inventing reasons why those sections are temporarily closed. And twice, late at night, I've heard sounds from the ridge where the deep cave is located, a rumbling, deep and resonant, that makes the ground tremble slightly. Both times the next day I found messages in the old chimney. It's trying harder. Seals are holding but barely. Might need your help soon. I don't know what I'll do when that time comes. I don't know if I'm prepared to help seal whatever's trying to break out of that cave, to face whatever ancient thing is sleeping in the deep places of the Smokies. But I know that the Caldwell family has been doing this work for 200 years, sacrificing their normal lives, their normal time, to keep the rest of us safe from things we don't even know exist. The Smokies are old. These mountains predate humans by hundreds of millions of years, and they contain things that predate the mountains. The Caldwell settlement isn't an anomaly. It's a symptom, a sign that there are deals and debts and duties being maintained in the shadows, keeping the ancient horrors contained, making sure the deep places stay sealed. And now I'm part of it, a ranger on the 2024 side, working with a family from 1823, both of us protecting visitors from threats they'll never know about. It's the strangest job I've ever had. But someone has to do it. Someone has to watch the thin places, guard the sealed caves, make sure the things that sleep in the mountains stay sleeping. The Caldwell family has been doing it for 2 centuries. I can do it for a few more years, at least until whatever's in that cave makes its next attempt to break free. Then we'll see if a family from 1823 and a ranger from 2024 can work together well enough to keep an ancient horror contained. The mountains are watching, the mountains are waiting, and the mountains have very long memories. Story 2. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 41 years old, and I've been a ranger at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia for 14 years. Shenandoah is beautiful. Rolling mountains, Skyline Drive running along the crest of the Blue Ridge, over 500 miles of hiking trails through forests that turn spectacular colors every fall. It's relatively safe, well-maintained, close enough to Washington, D.C. that we get heavy visitation, but remote enough to feel like true wilderness. I've always felt comfortable here, felt like I understood the rhythms of the park and the patterns of visitor behavior. But last October, I started finding hikers who'd been missing for decades, still alive, still walking the trails, completely unaware that any time had passed. And I've realized that certain sections of the Appalachian Trail in Shenandoah exist in loops where time circles back on itself, and people can walk the same miles for years without ever reaching their destination. It started with a routine call from dispatch. A hiker had been reported overdue. A 67-year-old man named Robert Dawson, experienced backpacker, was 3 days late returning from a solo hike on the AT. His car was still at the trailhead. His itinerary indicated he'd planned a 4-day, 40-mile section hike heading north from Rockfish Gap. Weather had been good, no reason for delays. We initiated standard search protocols. I was part of the team that hiked the section he'd planned to cover. We found him on day 2 of the search, about 15 miles into his planned route, hiking south. He looked healthy. His gear was in good condition, and he seemed cheerful and energetic, not at all like someone who'd been lost for 5 days. "Mr. Dawson, I'm Ranger Chen. Your family reported you overdue. Are you all right?" He looked confused. Overdue? I started yesterday morning. I'm right on schedule. Sir, you started 8 days ago. You were expected back 5 days ago. His confusion deepened. That's not possible. I've been hiking for exactly 1 day. Left Rockfish Gap yesterday at 7 a.m., hiked about 15 miles, camped last night at Black Rock Hut. Broke camp this morning, and I'm heading back to my car now. You're heading south, away from your car. Your car is north. No, I parked at Rockfish Gap, which is south. I'm heading back toward it. I pulled out my map, showed him his position. We're here, 15 miles north of Rockfish Gap. You've been hiking north deeper into the park for the past 8 days? He stared at the map, then at his surroundings, then back at the map. This doesn't make sense. I've been watching my progress. I've been hiking south toward my car. I know I have. We escorted him back to Rockfish Gap, a 15-mile hike that took us 6 hours. The entire way, Robert kept insisting something was wrong, that the trail wasn't behaving correctly, that landmarks weren't where he remembered them. When we reached his car, he looked at the date on his phone and nearly collapsed. 8 days had passed. 8 days during which he'd walked approximately 120 miles, but had somehow made no actual progress toward his destination, despite believing he was walking in the right direction the entire time. We put it down to disorientation, possible mild stroke, some kind of medical event that had affected his navigation and time sense. He was evaluated at the hospital, found to be in perfect health, and went home confused but physically fine. Except it happened again 2 weeks later. Different hiker, same section of trail. A woman in her 30s reported overdue by 6 days, found healthy, and insisting she'd only been hiking for 2 days. And she'd also been walking in circles somehow, covering distance but not making progress. I started researching, pulled records of missing hikers in Shenandoah going back decades, found a pattern. In a specific 15-mile section of the AT between Rockfish Gap and Swift Run Gap, hikers regularly went missing. Not many, maybe 2 or 3 a year, but consistently. Most were eventually found, confused about how much time had passed, insisting they'd only been out for a fraction of the actual duration. But some were never found at all. I decided to hike that section myself, alone, paying careful attention to my navigation. I started at Rockfish Gap at dawn, hiking north, checking my GPS every 15 minutes, photographing landmarks, documenting my progress meticulously. At mile marker 7, something changed. The trail looked the same. Same white blazes marking the AT, same forest, same terrain. But something felt different. The light was wrong, the sounds were muted, and when I checked my GPS, it showed me exactly where I should be. But when I looked at the photo I'd taken at this exact spot 15 minutes earlier, the landmark tree that should have been behind me was ahead of me. I was apparently walking north but returning to places I'd already passed. I tried walking south instead, same result. Tried leaving the trail entirely, bushwhacking east toward Skyline Drive, which should have been less than a mile away. Walked for an hour through thick forest, but the road never appeared. Eventually, I hit the AT again, coming back to it from what should have been the west side, but was somehow the east. I was caught in a loop, a section of trail that folded back on itself, where walking in any direction eventually returned you to where you'd started, and time moved differently here. I'd been hiking for what felt like 3 hours, but my watch showed 9 hours had passed. I set up camp, decided to wait it out, see if the loop would release me naturally. spent the night in my tent, and when I emerged at dawn, I found I wasn't alone. There was a man at a nearby campsite, maybe 50 years old, wearing hiking clothes from the 1970s. Old-style external frame pack, canvas gear, leather boots. He was making breakfast on a camp stove. Seemed perfectly at ease. "Morning," I called out. "How long you been out here?" "Started yesterday," he said. 3-day hike, Rockfish to Swift Run. You? "I'm a ranger. I'm investigating some unusual reports from this area. What's your name?" "Tom Harrison, from Richmond. This is my annual fall hike. Been doing this same route for 5 years now. Always beautiful this time of year." Something about his answer bothered me. "What year do you think it is?" He laughed. 1978. "Why, you testing if I hit my head or something?" My skin went cold. "And you've been doing this hike every fall for 5 years? Since 1973? "That's right. Same route, same time of year. Never gets old." I pulled out my phone, showed him the date. 2024. 46 years after he thought it was. He stared at the screen, then at me, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion to growing horror. "That's not possible. I started this hike yesterday. Yesterday was October 12th, 1978. "Tom, I need to verify something. What color is your car?" "Blue Ford Pinto, parked at Rockfish Gap." I radioed dispatch, had them check historical missing persons reports. They called back 20 minutes later. Tom Harrison, age 37, reported missing, October 1978. Last known location, Shenandoah National Park. Vehicle found at Rockfish Gap Trailhead, never located despite extensive search. "Tom," I said gently, "you've been missing for 46 years. You've been walking this section of trail the entire time, stuck in a loop where you experience the same 3 days over and over, never reaching your destination." He sat down heavily. "That can't be right. I remember yesterday. I remember starting the hike. I remember every day. There have only been 2 of them. There have been 16,000 of them. You've been walking the same miles for 46 years, and the loop has kept you preserved, kept you experiencing the same span of days over and over while real time passed outside." Over the next hour, I explained what had happened, showed him more evidence, helped him understand that he'd been caught in a temporal anomaly that had trapped him in 1978 while the rest of the world moved forward. He took it better than I expected. Maybe after 46 years of walking the same trail, some part of him had suspected something was wrong. "Can I leave?" he asked. "Can I get out of the loop?" "I don't know. I'm caught in it too right now. But I think there might be a way. The loop has to have boundaries, edges, where it connects back to normal time. If we can find those edges and cross them deliberately, we might be able to break free." We spent the day exploring the loop's boundaries, mapping where the trail folded back on itself, finding the seams where different sections connected, and we found other hikers, 3 more from different eras. A woman from 1983, a man from 1991, a couple from 2003. All of them walking the same section, all believing they'd only been out for a few days, all trapped in loops where time circled endlessly. We gathered them all together, compared notes, tried to understand the mechanics of the trap, and we discovered something crucial. The loop wasn't random. It was centered on a specific spot, about 9 miles into the section. an area where two unofficial trails intersected with the AT, forming a crossroads. At the center of that crossroads was a stone marker, old and weathered, with symbols carved into it that none of us recognized. "The Cherokee used to live in this area," I said, examining the stone. "Before the park was established, before European settlement, these symbols might be a warning or a seal of some kind." Tom, who'd been stuck in the loop longest and had inadvertently walked past this stone thousands of times, pointed out something I'd missed. "The symbols change," he said. "I've seen this stone on every hike I thought I was doing. The symbols are slightly different each time, like they're counting something or tracking something." We examined the stone more carefully. The symbols were weathered but clear, and Tom was right. Comparing them to photographs I'd taken hours earlier showed subtle changes. The stone was active, was maintaining some kind of process, was perhaps the anchor point for the temporal loop. "What if we move it?" the woman from 1983 suggested. "What if the stone is what creates the loop and moving it would break the effect?" We tried. 6 of us working together, we managed to pry the stone loose from the ground and roll it about 20 feet off the trail. The moment it moved past a certain point, reality shuddered. The light changed, the air pressure dropped, and we all felt a sensation like falling, even though we were standing still. When the sensation passed, everything was different. The trail looked more maintained, the forest less wild. And when we checked our devices, those of us who had them, we found we had cell signals. We'd broken out of the loop, returned to normal time. We hiked out together, 6 people from different eras, all emerging from the same 15-mile section that had held us trapped. Tom Harrison, missing since 1978, walked out into 2024. The others, missing for shorter periods, reunited with families who thought them dead. But the stone worried me. We'd moved it, broken its function, released the trapped hikers. But we didn't understand what it was originally meant to do, what purpose it served. Were the time loops intentional? Was the stone meant to trap people, or was it meant to keep something else contained? I went back a week later with a team of researchers. We excavated the area around where the stone had been, looking for more artifacts or evidence of its purpose. And we found something disturbing, a shaft going straight down into the mountain, maybe 30 feet deep, sealed with a stone plug that had cracked. The marker stone wasn't creating the loop, one of the researchers realized. It was sealing this shaft, and the temporal distortions were a side effect, a boundary that kept people away from this location. We moved the stone and broke the seal. What's in the shaft? We didn't dig deeper, didn't try to remove the cracked seal, because from deep in that shaft, we could hear something. Not sound exactly, but vibration, a rhythm that felt like breathing or waiting. Something down there that the Cherokee had sealed away, that the marker stone had been keeping locked, that we'd accidentally partially released by trying to free the trapped hikers. We replaced the marker stone as best we could, but it wouldn't work the same way. The symbols had changed when we moved it. The enchantment or technology or whatever it was had been disrupted. The temporal loops didn't reform. That section of trail is normal now, safe for hikers. No more time traps. But sometimes at night, when I'm patrolling that area, I can feel something watching from beneath the ground. Something that used to be sealed, that was accidentally given a crack to peer through that might be slowly working its way toward a larger opening. The Cherokee sealed it for a reason. The temporal loops, the trapped hikers, the strange boundaries, those were all side effects of keeping something contained. And we broke the containment to save 6 people, which was the right thing to do. But I worry about what we've released, what we've given access to. Shenandoah still feels safe most of the time, but that 15-mile section between Rockfish Gap and Swift Run Gap, I avoid it when I can. And I've recommended it be closed permanently for geological instability, though my request was denied due to lack of evidence. The thing in the shaft is still down there, still waiting, still breathing, and every day the cracked seal weakens a little more. I saved 6 people from temporal loops, but I might have endangered thousands more by breaking the seal that kept something ancient and patient locked away. Sometimes the trap isn't meant for us. Sometimes it's meant to keep something else in. And sometimes breaking free means letting something terrible follow you out. Story 3. I've worked as a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for almost 11 years now. When you spend that long out here, you start to understand that the woods aren't as empty as people think. They breathe, they listen, and sometimes they look back. My post sits near the Tennessee-North Carolina line, about 5 miles from Clingman's Dome, where the fog rolls like it's alive. You can hear it whisper through the branches at night, not wind, but something that moves slower, heavier. Back in 2016, I got assigned to a missing person case that stayed with me ever since. A hiker named Evan McClary, 29 years old, went missing near Andrews Bald Trail. He'd been out solo camping, part of one of those online survival groups, the kind of people who pride themselves on going off-grid for a weekend. His girlfriend reported him missing after 3 days of silence. Normally, we'd find a campfire site, some tracks, or at least a backpack. But this time, we didn't find a damn thing. The first search party consisted of me, Ranger Lyle Henderson, and 2 volunteers from a local hiking club. We started at dawn, fog hanging so thick it looked like the tree line was bleeding into the sky. Henderson was one of those old-school rangers, straight, posture, slow talker, didn't believe in superstition, but carried a silver cross anyway. "You ever notice," he said that morning, "how quiet this park gets after rain?" I had. Birds go silent, frogs stop croaking, even the wind feels like it's holding its breath. That morning was one of those silences, the kind that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own heartbeat. We followed the ridge for hours. Around noon, we found signs of a campfire near an old watchtower site that had collapsed years ago. Logs half burned, ashes still damp, looked like it had rained overnight. Beside the fire pit was a folded map Evans. His name was written on the corner in pencil. But what chilled me wasn't that he'd left it there. It was what was scribbled all over it, dozens of circles, all drawn around the same section of the ridge over and over again, like he'd been trying to mark something invisible. And in the center of every circle he'd written one word: looking. Henderson frowned at it. "You think he was following something?" I said maybe, though I didn't believe it. The handwriting was shaky, panicked. It wasn't planning, it was obsession. By 3 p.m., fog started sinking low again. Visibility dropped to about 20 feet, and the forest took on that greenish tint it gets just before dusk. Henderson suggested we head back to base, but I wanted one more hour. Something about those circles didn't sit right with me. We split up, me looping east, him staying on the trail. I followed a faint footpath that veered downhill. My boots sank in soft moss, and water trickled from somewhere unseen. I remember the smell like wet stone and pine sap. That's when I heard it, a voice. It was faint, echoing through the fog. Hello? I froze. It wasn't Henderson's voice. This one sounded younger, uncertain, like someone calling for help, but not wanting to be too loud. Evan, I called back. Silence. Then, a few seconds later, same voice. Over here. It came from deeper in the trees, maybe 50 yards ahead. I radioed Henderson. No response. I figured the ridge was blocking the signal, so I moved toward the sound, marking trees with chalk as I went. The deeper I went, the colder it got. My breath fogged in front of me, and every branch seemed to shift slightly after I passed, as if the forest were rearranging itself. Then I found it. A small clearing with a fire pit, but this one was different. The ashes were fresh, faintly warm when I knelt beside them, and near it, half buried under pine needles, was a torn piece of a ranger's uniform sleeve, the patch still attached. Not ours. The design was old, outdated, from back before the 90s uniform change. That's when I realized the voice wasn't coming from the clearing anymore. It was behind me. Over here, it said again. I turned so fast I nearly slipped on the mud. Nothing, just fog. Then I saw movement, something tall, maybe 6 feet, standing between two oaks. It wasn't moving, just watching. I raised my flashlight, but the beam caught only mist. Whatever it was, it turned and stepped back, like it melted into the fog. That's when Henderson's voice finally crackled through my radio. Base to Ranger Cole, you copy? Get back to the trail now. I didn't argue. I marked the spot and made my way up the ridge, but when I looked back, I swear I saw it again, that same tall shape halfway hidden, its head tilted like it was trying to understand me. We regrouped at the trailhead just before dusk. Henderson looked pale. Someone was calling my name out there, he said quietly. Sounded like you. We exchanged looks, but didn't say much after that. Back at the station, I logged everything: location, condition, map details. The search was officially suspended 2 days later. Evan was never found. Not his gear, not his remains, nothing. A week after the case closed, I went back alone. Call it unfinished business or maybe guilt. When I reached the clearing again, the ashes were cold, but there were fresh footprints leading to where I'd seen the figure. Bare feet, deep impressions, heel to toe. And right in the center of that clearing, etched into the dirt, was one word: looking. When you spend enough nights alone in the forest, you start hearing things that might not even be there. That's what I told myself the morning I went back to that clearing. I logged what I saw, erased the word written in the dirt, and hiked back out, but something about those bare footprints stuck with me. They were small, not childlike, but smaller than a grown man's, maybe size 8 or 9, and the stride was long, longer than any barefoot hiker I've seen. Whoever it was had walked barefoot across pine needles, rocks, and frost. That's not human behavior out here. I didn't tell Henderson I went back. He'd been shaken since the search. I saw it in his eyes. Every time fog rolled in, he'd tense up, glance into the tree line like he expected to see something watching us again. A week later, I got a call from dispatch. A camper at the old Forney Ridge trailhead reported hearing a man calling for help in the woods around 3 a.m. The voice kept saying, "Over here." Same phrase, same tone. That trailhead was less than a mile from where I'd found the footprints. I didn't even wait for backup. By the time I arrived, fog covered everything again, that thick green-gray kind that makes headlights useless. The forest felt wrong. No insects, no wind, just rain dripping off the branches like it didn't want to stop. I parked, grabbed my flashlight, and started up the path. My radio crackled a bit, a faint whisper of static that almost sounded like breathing. I ignored it and kept moving until I saw light through the fog. A fire. It flickered faintly, too controlled to be a wildfire, too random to be a lantern. When I got closer, my stomach turned. It was Evan's camp stove, the one we'd listed as missing from his pack inventory. It was set up neatly beside a new circle of rocks, flames still burning steady. Someone had been here. Then I noticed something else. Just beyond the light, beside a dead oak, there was a figure standing perfectly still. Tall, lean, shoulders too narrow. I raised my flashlight and called out, "Park Service, identify yourself." The beam caught its face, or what looked like one. For half a second, I saw pale skin stretched too tight, a jaw that seemed too wide, and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Then it turned and slipped behind the tree like a shadow being pulled out of sight. I chased it, heart hammering so loud it drowned the rain. The ground sloped down sharply, and I nearly lost my footing. The fog thickened again, swallowing the beam of my flashlight. Then, clear as day, I heard Henderson's voice. "Cole, over here!" My stomach dropped. Henderson was off duty nowhere near this area. I'd seen him leave the station myself. "Lyle," I shouted, "where are you?" Silence. Then the same voice, a little closer. "Over here." That tone, identical cadence, same pitch, even the same break at the end of the word here. My brain screamed that it wasn't him, but something deeper, some instinct buried in me, wanted to believe it was. I followed the sound until I reached a creek that cut through the ridge. My flashlight caught movement upstream, a shape hunched near the water, back turned, looked like someone washing their hands. "Lyle." The figure straightened. Its head turned slowly, just enough for me to see its profile. It was Henderson's face, but pale wet and wrong. The eyes were too dark, and the mouth stretched into something like a smile. Then it stepped back into the water and vanished beneath the surface. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe longer. When I finally moved, I nearly tripped over something half buried in the mud, a ranger badge. Old, rusted, the name barely legible. Henderson, L. The next day, real Henderson didn't show up for his shift. We searched his cabin, his truck, every trail he was known to patrol. No sign of him. I wanted to tell someone what I'd seen, but how do you explain that? That you saw your partner's reflection walking before he disappeared, that you found his badge in a place he'd never been? 2 nights later, I was closing up the ranger station when I heard knocking on the back door. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. We don't get visitors that way. That door leads into the forest. I grabbed my flashlight and cracked it open. Nobody there, just fog and the steady drip of rain off the eaves. But then, faintly, just beyond the porch light, I saw him. Henderson. He was standing at the tree line, uniform soaked, eyes reflecting the light like glass. He raised a hand, like he wanted to wave me over. "Over here," he said. His mouth moved a fraction too slow for the sound, like a recording playing slightly out of sync. I slammed the door. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the old ranger patch I'd found in the clearing. I did some digging. The uniform design matched those worn before 1992, back when a ranger named Lewis Henderson went missing during a patrol near the same ridge. No relation to Lyle. Different first name, different decade. Hey, but here's the thing that made me sick to my stomach. The last radio transmission from Lewis Henderson, recorded 30 years earlier, ended with one phrase. "Base, this is Ranger Henderson. I see someone in the trees. He's calling me. Says, 'Over here.'" After that, nothing but static. Oh, and now my partner, same name, same fate. I've transferred out of the Smokies since then. I still get calls from rangers up there sometimes, small talk mostly, but every so often one of them mentions the fog, how they swear they hear a voice when it gets thick, whispering just out of view. They always say the same thing. It sounds like someone saying, "Over here." When they ask me what I think it is, I never answer, because deep down, I already know. Somewhere out there in that mist, something is still looking. Story 4. I started my assignment at Olympic National Park in the spring of 2018. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever worked, but also one of the loneliest. The trees out there don't whisper like they do in other forests. They watch. When fog rolls in from the Pacific and the old-growth ferns start dripping with dew, you can't tell where the ground ends and the sky begins. The air gets heavy, damp, quiet. You could stand 5 feet from someone and still feel completely alone. My post was near the whole rainforest, about 15 miles from the coast. A small ranger cabin, 1 truck, radio tower, and miles of trail to monitor. It wasn't unusual for hikers to go missing for a night or two. The fog disorients people, and trails loop back in ways that mess with your sense of direction. But one particular stretch, the Red Lantern Trail, had a reputation. Not officially. You wouldn't find that name on any map. But the locals, especially the older rangers, called it that because sometimes at night, a red light could be seen moving through the trees. "Don't follow it," my supervisor told me my first week. "Even if you think it's someone in trouble, don't go off trail for it." At the time, I thought it was a joke, just local superstition, but the story behind it goes way back. In the 1930s, a fire watcher named Frank Talbot was stationed in a tower deep in the western range. One night, his lantern was seen flickering red across the valley. The next morning, his tower was empty. They never found him, but sometimes hikers reported seeing a faint red glow drifting through the fog, like someone still walking with that same lantern. I didn't believe any of it, not until last September. It started with a missing persons call a couple from Oregon, Liam and Rachel Dunn, mid-30s, both experienced hikers. They'd set out to photograph the forest after dark, using long exposure shots. Their car was found parked neatly at the whole visitor center, gear still inside except for 2 cameras and a small lantern. We started searching the next morning. I was paired with Ranger Julia Park, a quiet woman with 7 years on the job. We'd done searches before, but she looked uneasy that morning, eyes darting toward the tree line every few minutes. "You okay?" I asked. She shrugged. "Yeah, just, I don't like this area." We followed their expected route along the main loop, then cut east where the ground started to dip. Around noon, fog began rolling in earlier than usual. Julia radioed in and dispatch told us to stick close. Visibility was dropping fast. The trees here are massive, centuries old, coated in moss, so thick it looks like fur. Sound doesn't travel right. Every footstep echoes weirdly, like someone's following a few paces behind. We found Rachel's camera first. It was half buried in the mud beside a log. The lens was cracked, but the SD card was still inside. Oh, I pocketed it. A few yards ahead, we saw something that made both of us stop. There were two sets of footprints side by side, and then suddenly one veered sharply off the trail, straight into the trees. No hesitation, no circling back, no sign of a struggle. Just gone. Julia knelt, tracing the prints with her gloved hand. "He followed something," she said. "We followed the tracks for about 50 yards until they stopped completely at a small clearing, perfectly circular, maybe 20 feet wide. The moss flattened like something heavy had moved through recently. That's when I saw it. A red light, faint and pulsing, deeper in the fog. It wasn't steady, like a flashlight. It flickered, swaying slightly, the way a lantern does when carried by hand." Julia whispered, No, not this." I turned to her. "What?" "Don't go closer," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, just radio it in." But the light was moving away, and my first thought was that it might be one of the missing hikers. I didn't think. I just moved. Julia called after me, but her voice was swallowed by fog. The trees closed in, tall and endless, and the red glow pulled me forward like a heartbeat in the dark. The air smelled of wet iron. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no rain, not even the sound of my boots. Just that dim, pulsing light up ahead. Then it stopped. I stepped into another clearing. The red light hung about 10 feet in front of me, not floating, not handheld. It was burning in the air, like a small ember suspended mid-fog. As I moved closer, I realized it wasn't fire. It was a lantern, an old rusted oil lamp with a cracked glass cover. It swayed gently from a branch that didn't exist, dangling from nothing. And beneath it was a backpack. I recognized the tag, Rachel's. The lantern flickered once bright enough to wash the trees red and then went out. When it did, I saw movement just beyond the edge of the clearing, a figure standing half in fog, half in shadow. It wasn't holding a light, but I could still see its outline, broad shoulders, head tilted slightly downward. It looked like it was wearing an old ranger coat, the kind with brass buttons. I started to speak, but the figure raised its hand slowly, pointing back toward the trail. I don't remember turning around. I just ran. Branches tore at my jacket, and the fog felt thicker with every breath. When I finally burst out onto the main trail, Julia grabbed me, eyes wide. "Where the hell did you go?" she shouted. I turned around. The fog was thinning now, and through the trees I could still see a faint glow, dim, red, fading slowly. When we got back to the station, I showed the SD card to our tech guy. He pulled up the last few photos on the card, the ones Rachel had taken before disappearing. The first few were just forest shots, fog, long exposure blur. Then the last one, the final image, showed a faint red light through the trees. And standing beside it, barely visible through the haze, was a man in a ranger's uniform. The photo was time-stamped 2:37 a.m., over 12 hours before we even started searching. They say some places remember, that even if people forget, the ground doesn't. After we found that camera, the investigation moved quickly. Park Service pulled in a full search team, dogs, helicopters, the works. But after a week, nothing. Not a single trace of Liam or Rachel Dunn beyond that camera and backpack. Still, something about that last photo ate at me. The time stamp, the man's outline, the red glow, none of it made sense. I knew the missing fire watcher story was just folklore, but seeing that uniform in the picture, I couldn't let it go. I printed the image and kept it on my desk. Every time I looked at it, I noticed something new, a faint outline of a tower in the background, barely visible through the fog. The park hasn't had a tower in that sector for decades. I spent nights combing through old records and eventually found a mention of Fire Tower 9A, decommissioned in 1936 after a structural collapse. The ranger stationed there, Frank Talbot, the one whose lantern supposedly glowed red the night he vanished. The next morning, I asked my supervisor for permission to survey the ruins. He hesitated. "That site's not safe," he said. "It's not even on the active patrol map anymore." I told him I'd take full responsibility. By noon, Julia and I were on our way. She wasn't happy about it, but she came anyway. "You really think this has something to do with the Dunns?" she asked as we crossed a shallow creek. "I don't know," I said, "but whatever it is, they were heading this way." The forest grew darker as we climbed. The canopy was thick, almost suffocating, and the air smelled faintly metallic, the same scent I'd noticed near the red light. We reached the remains of the old tower just before dusk. It wasn't much anymore, just 4 half-rotted beams and the rusted outline of a staircase winding into nothing. Moss had eaten through the base, and ferns grew where the watch floor used to be. At the center of it all, lying half buried in the dirt, was an old lantern. I didn't touch it. Julia did, though, brushing off mud with her glove. "There's still oil in it," she whispered. Before I could stop her, she struck a match. The lantern flared to life bright red. The light was wrong. It didn't flicker like fire. It pulsed, slow and deliberate, like it was breathing. Everything around us shifted into shades of red and black. The trees looked taller, the shadows deeper. "Put it out," I said. But Julia was staring at something beyond me, her eyes wide, unfocused. "He's here," she murmured. "Who?" Her gaze followed something moving between the trees, a tall, dark figure, lantern-light, glinting off what looked like brass buttons. I reached for her arm, but she stepped toward it, slow, like she was sleepwalking. "He wants me to see," she said. Then she started walking into the fog. "Julia!" I shouted. The red light flared brighter, and I swear I heard footsteps circling me, soft, deliberate, dragging through wet leaves. I turned, and for a second there was someone standing right behind me, a man's silhouette, too close. The light went out. When I could see again, Julia was gone. I screamed for her until my voice went raw. The forest gave nothing back, no echo, no sound at all. I called it in, of course, reported her missing, retraced every step, even brought in Sar, but like the Dunns, Julia was just gone. No prints, no gear, no sign she'd ever been there. They told me to take time off. "Stress can mess with perception," my supervisor said gently. I didn't argue, but I didn't sleep either. For days, I kept seeing faint flashes of red in the trees outside my cabin window. Sometimes, I'd hear the faint clink of metal, like a lantern swinging from a chain. One night, about a week later, I woke up to the smell of smoke. My heart stopped. I thought the cabin was on fire. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, and there it was again, the red glow, floating maybe 20 feet from the tree line. Only this time, it wasn't a single light. There were three. They moved slowly through the fog, weaving between the trees, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes behind them, faint outlines of people walking in perfect rhythm. Liam, Rachel, Julia. The lights flickered once, and I heard a man's voice, faint, like coming through an old radio. All clear. Tower 9. Reporting visibility 0. Static followed. Then silence. The next morning, I went to my supervisor and handed in my resignation. He looked tired. He didn't even ask why. Just said, "Sometimes the forest keeps what it takes." That was 3 years ago. Last week, I got a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a small metal tag, rusted nearly beyond recognition. I cleaned it gently with steel wool. It read, F. Talbot Fire Watcher. And wrapped around it was a strip of cloth that smelled faintly of oil and smoke. Every night since, I've been waking up around 2:30 a.m., the room filled with a faint red glow that fades when I turn my head. I keep telling myself it's nothing, a trick of the eyes, tail lights from the highway, something explainable. But sometimes, when it's really quiet, I hear the creak of wood and a voice drifting through the dark. Tower 9, a reporting, all clear. And when I look toward the window, there's always the faintest reflection of a lantern swinging gently, as if someone's still walking that trail, still keeping watch, still waiting to be seen. Story 5. When I took the transfer to Hollow Creek Station, I thought I was getting lucky. Back then, I'd been with the Park Service for 8 years. Too long at a busy post, too many missing hiker calls, too many nights listening to coyotes scream like women. I wanted quiet, solitude. Hollow Creek was supposed to be that. Just a small ranger cabin in the lower Shenandoah Range, miles from the nearest trailhead. One access road, no radio towers, and a visitor count so low they barely justified keeping it staffed. My supervisor, Ron, told me it used to be a fire monitoring site before the new towers went up. The original ranger quarters still stood. One-room wood cabin, stone foundation, a tin roof that sang when the rain came. It sounded perfect. When I got there that March, I found the cabin in decent shape, but the air around it felt thick. Not heavy like humidity, thick like the forest was holding its breath. Locals in Luray had warned me about it. They called the area around Hollow Creek the Listening Woods. Oh, said you could hear things out there at night that weren't quite animals, weren't quite human. I laughed it off, of course. You hear that stuff all the time in small mountain towns. Every stretch of Appalachia has its stories. But the first night changed something in me. The generator had kicked out around midnight. I stepped outside with a flashlight, and the forest was dead quiet. No frogs, no wind, not even crickets. The only sound was Hollow Creek itself, whispering down the ravine about 20 yards behind the cabin. I was crouched beside the fuel drum when I heard it. A voice, faint, like someone whispering from inside a metal pipe. "You hear me now?" I froze. The beam from my flashlight trembled across the trees. At first, I thought it was a radio. Maybe interference from one of the fire towers. But when I went back inside, the radio was unplugged. The voice came again, clearer this time, and closer. "Don't leave the lights off." I swept the flashlight toward the sound, catching the outline of a figure by the creek. Looked like someone in uniform, maybe another ranger. But before I could shout, the beam cut through a veil of fog, and the figure wasn't there anymore. The sound of boots on gravel echoed once, then silence. I told myself I was overtired. First night on post, isolation, stress. But the voice stayed in my head all night. Over the next few days, small things started happening. I'd wake up to find the front door unlatched, even though I locked it every night. The generator fuel would drop faster than expected. Once, I found muddy boot prints leading from the back of the cabin to the edge of the creek. Prints that stopped abruptly, mid-step, like whoever made them vanished. I tried radio and bass about it, but the signal barely reached. All I got was static. Then, one morning, I found something half buried under the cabin steps. A metal badge, corroded and blackened. It read, Ranger T. Miller, Hollow Creek Station. I took it inside, cleaned it off, and noticed burn marks along the edges. It looked like it had been through a fire. Later that day, I called Ron and asked if anyone named Miller had worked here before. He paused a long time before answering. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Thomas Miller. Worked this post in the late 70s. Disappeared during the Hollow Creek fire in 79. They never found him. Why?" I told him about the badge. He didn't say a word for several seconds. Finally, "If you found that there, you might want to head back to base for a few nights." I should have listened, but I didn't. That night, I stayed up reading through the old station logs I found in a locked cabinet. The last entry from Ranger Miller was dated October 19, 1979. It said, "Smoke heavy tonight. Visibility near zero. Heard voices calling for help near creek. No visual confirmation. Lanterns visible through fog, unsure if reflection or something else. Following sound downstream." That was it. No final report. No follow-up entry. Around midnight, fog rolled in again, thicker than before. The air felt electric, humming like the moment before a lightning strike. I stepped outside, holding my flashlight and the badge. The forest was glowing faintly silver. The creek hissed louder than usual, and through the mist, I saw a light moving slowly between the trees. Not a flashlight beam, a lantern. It bobbed back and forth, steady and deliberate, the same way a ranger would walk a perimeter. I whispered, "Miller," before I could stop myself. The lantern paused. Then, through the fog, a voice drifted back, hoarse, hollow, like the wind speaking through a broken throat. "I heard you." The light turned and began moving toward me. I backed up to the cabin steps, heart pounding. My flashlight flickered, then died completely. The air was freezing now, wet and metallic, and I could see my breath coming out in pale clouds. The light stopped about 20 feet away. I could make out the faint outline of a man, broad shoulders, ranger hat, jacket, burned along the sleeve. He lifted the lantern, and for a split second, I saw his face, ashen gray, eyes hollow, jaw hanging slightly open as if frozen mid-scream. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the lantern blinked out. And from the darkness, the voice whispered one last time, "It's still burning." When I came to, it was morning. The flashlight was in my hand, still off. The badge lay in the dirt beside me, warm to the touch like it had been sitting near a flame. The forest was quiet again. The creek sounded normal. But when I went to check the generator, I noticed the side of the cabin wall facing the creek charred black, as if it had burned overnight, though there was no sign of actual fire. The wood smelled faintly of smoke and oil, and written in the soot with a finger were 3 words. Heard you now? I called Ron again that afternoon. He said they were sending someone up to relieve me just to be safe, but the roads were washed out from last night's storm. It would take a day or 2. So I'm still here tonight, waiting, listening. The air smells like rain, but there's a faint, acrid edge beneath it, smoke. If I close my eyes, I can hear footsteps pacing just outside the cabin, slow, careful, measured. It's the same rhythm I use when I patrol. Sometimes I wonder if Hollow Creek ever stopped burning, or if it just learned how to hide its fire in the fog. I barely slept that night. The rain started sometime after midnight, hard and cold, hammering against the tin roof until it sounded like static pouring from every direction. Every few minutes, I'd catch myself sitting up in bed, thinking I'd heard boots on the porch again. I kept telling myself it was just the storm. But the thing about being alone in the woods, the longer you sit in that silence, the more your mind starts hearing patterns. Footsteps in raindrops, whispers in the wind. Except around 3 a.m., I realized I wasn't imagining it. The door latch clicked. Not once a full, careful lift, followed by a soft thud as the wood settled to gone. I aimed my flashlight at the door, heart pounding. Nothing moved. The beam caught a faint wisp of mist rolling through the bottom crack, curling across the floorboards like smoke. That smell hit again, not rain, not damp wood, burnt oil and ash. I forced myself up, crept to the window. Through the fog and the relentless rain, I saw a light bobbing by the creek again. Same as before, same deliberate human pace. But this time there were 2. I grabbed my radio. Static. Tried again, nothing. Base, this is Hollow Creek Station, come in. Nothing but white noise, then faintly under it, something that sounded like breathing. You left the light off again. I dropped the radio. The voice wasn't from the forest. This time it was coming from the speaker. I yanked the battery out and threw the damn thing across the room. For a while I just sat there at the small wooden table staring at the lantern I'd left burning since the night before. The flame flickered, weak but steady. It made the shadows on the wall ripple like they were alive. I thought about packing up and hiking down early, storm or not, but the roads were washed out, and I knew the ridge trail would be flooded. The only option was to wait until daylight. That was my mistake. Sometime before dawn, I must have drifted off in the chair. When I woke up, the room was filled with fog thick enough that I could barely see my own boots. The lantern was still lit, but its light seemed dimmer somehow, like it was being swallowed by the air itself. And then I saw someone standing across the room. A ranger hat, the outline of a jacket, hands at his sides. "Miller?" I whispered. He didn't move. I reached for the lantern, lifted it higher. The fog shifted, and for an instant I saw his face, blackened skin, eyes milky white, smoke curling from the collar of his jacket. I stumbled back, knocking the chair over. He tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. Then his mouth opened, and I swear to God, firelight flickered inside. "You heard me." The words sounded like a match strike. Then the lantern blew out. I bolted out the door, into the rain and the darkness. I didn't stop running until I hit the creek. The fog was so dense I couldn't even see the cabin behind me. I turned toward the sound of rushing water, only to realize there wasn't any. The creek was dry, bone dry, as if it hadn't seen rain in months. The bed was cracked and black, still warm to the touch. Steam rose from it. That's when I heard the sound of fire again, a distant rolling crackle. I looked up and saw the fog glowing orange. Something was burning in the forest. I ran uphill, trying to find a vantage point. The glow grew stronger, pulsing like the horizon was breathing. But as I reached the ridge, I realized the light wasn't fire. It was lanterns. Dozens of them, hanging in the trees, swaying gently in the fog. Each one burned with that same sickly orange flame, the kind that doesn't cast warmth. And beneath them, half seen through the smoke, were figures. Men and women in old ranger uniforms, scorched, melted in places, walking slowly through the trees. Their movements were stiff, unnatural, like marionettes, trying to remember how to be human. One of them stopped and looked right at me. His badge glinted in the light. Ranger T. Miller. He raised a hand and pointed back toward the cabin. Then all the lanterns went out at once. When I stumbled back to Hollow Creek Station, the door was wide open. Inside, everything was wet floorboard soaked, logs in the fireplace blackened and cold. But what stopped me was the footprints on the floor. Boot prints, hundreds of them, burned into the wood, some leading in from the door, others circling the table, a few stopping right in front of where I'd been sitting. And all of them faced the bedroom door. I followed them, hand shaking on the lantern. The bedroom door was cracked open, and inside the air shimmered like heat haze. On the bed was a charred uniform, hat, badge, and boots, all laid out neatly. The badge read Ranger T. Miller. But right beside it, half melted, was another one, mine. Ranger E. Colton, Hollow Creek Station. The metal was still hot. I remember backing away slowly, whispering to myself that it wasn't real, that I was dreaming, that the smoke was making me see things. Then the whisper came again. It's still burning, only this time it came from inside the cabin. The floorboards under me began to glow faintly red, the smell of burning pine rising all around. I ran outside into the storm and didn't stop until I hit the road 2 miles down. I hid under the culvert until daylight. When the relief crew finally reached the cabin the next morning, they said they found it sealed shut. The windows were boarded from the inside, door nailed tight. Took them half an hour to pry it open. They said the walls were black with soot, like a fire had burned there years ago, but the wood itself wasn't damaged, just stained. The station log I'd been writing in was sitting open on the table. My last entry was written in a shaking hand. Smoke thick, voices near creek, lanterns in fog, following sound downstream. The exact same words as Miller's final report from 1979. I left the Park Service a month later, moved north, took a job in Vermont away from the mountains. But some nights, when it rains, I still hear the tin roof drumming like static. And sometimes when I check my reflection in the window, I swear there's a light flickering faintly behind me, orange, like a dying lantern flame. I haven't told anyone about what really happened out there, not until now. Because last week, I got a call from my old supervisor, Ron. They're reopening Hollow Creek Station. He asked if I still had my old badge, said they never found it after the fire. I told him no, but when I checked my desk drawer that night, it was sitting there blackened, edges melted, warm to the touch. And scratched into the back of it, clear as day, with 3 words, "Heard you now."